Welcome back to Dark Skies Ahead on Lighthead. This episode of the show and every episode in 2021 is going to be brought to you by Keystone Technologies. That's KEYSTONETECH.com, KeystoneTech.com, the easy folks. What's happening, Jane Slade?
Well, hello, Mike Colligan. You are back from vacation. How was your vacation? Did you have any dark sky experiences?
You know, it's interesting that you would ask that, of all people, but yes. It was funny because a lot of things have been canceled in the last year and a half for kids specifically. And so I did a bunch of trips. I have 4 children, so I did a bunch of trips to my father-in-law's cottage, which is in the northern part of southern Ontario. Ontario is enormous, so the northern part of southern Ontario. And the first day I got there, I was with my daughter Ella and 3 of her friends. And we arrived at night. And I walked down to the cottage, which is on the lake, and I looked up, and there was, whatever that scale is. I can never remember the name of it, but on
Portal
the
scale.
Bortle scale, it's probably like a 7, or I think that's a
That's
good, yeah. Probably
seven
like
is bad.
7, then like a 3, or 2 or
Okay.
3, or something like that. Sorry. I should
Yeah.
know all this as co-host of Starving for Darkness, but I don't. So like a 3 on the Bortle scale. And
Mhm.
so what I did was I took after they packed their stuff up, I turned off all the lights in the cottage and made sure all, everything was off and that they didn't have their cell phones with them. And I took them down to the dock, and I told them to lay down on the lake and close their eyes. So they did this, and they're like, "Dad, you know what? There's mosquitoes out here." And I said, "Just keep your eyes closed." And then boom, they open their eyes and they're like, "Whoa, holy mackerel, this is incredible." And it was a really wonderful experience for them, and they enjoyed it. I brought the binoculars out, so they were looking at the stars lying on their backs through binoculars, which is, you don't really need a telescope to get interesting with the stars. Binoculars get you, as soon as you put on a pair of binoculars and you look at a star, all of a sudden you see there's all sorts of stars around that star.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
binoculars are just a really cool tool for people listening to this if they want to experience the stars, even on a very polluted sky. You can see a lot more stars with binoculars. So we did that, and then the moon came out a couple days later. It was full, the moon waxed or waned or whatever the thing it is, and then we were looking at the moon through the binoculars, a full moon sitting around a fire, and so there was a lot of. I was very cognizant, more than ever. I was very cognizant of the dark skies, but there's a bit of a tragedy that that I realized. Have you ever heard of the band The Tragically Hip?
Oh, yes. In fact, my Canadian friends just sent me an article about why the tragically hip are so important to Canadian culture.
Hmm.
And I'll send it to you because it's a great article and I felt very informed as an American.
So I think the song is called Bob Cajun. It actually is called that. And there's a line in it so my father-in-law's cottage, the closest town is Bob Cajun. That's the closest
Mhm.
city to the cottage, and where we would go in to buy groceries, say, or something like that. And so in a Tragically Hip song, it says, "I was in Bob Cajun, and I saw the constellations reveal themselves one star at a time."
Mm.
Okay, that's a
Mm.
line from a Tragically Hip song. But the problem is, Bob Cajun has become very light polluted since that song was written, and you can no longer see the the sky from Bob Cajun very clearly.
Mhm.
And as well as that, I found out in 2017 that the Buckhorn Observatory, so Buckhorn is the other town, so on one side of the lake is Bob Cajun, on the other side is Buckhorn, and there's an observatory called the Buckhorn Observatory that had been shut down because of the light pollution. And
Mm.
so I had been to this observatory 2 or 3 times over the last 20 years and saw the moons of Jupiter, and was able to see the, what's that nebula called? I can't remember what it's called. But anyway, it's wonderful to experience. I'm not a stargazing expert, but I enjoy it intermittently throughout my life. And so I was shown these nebulas and all this kind of stuff, and we spent about 3 hours there, just looking stargazing with this fellow. And so he had shut down his observatory because of the light pollution. And then when I noticed that you could actually, for the first time I became aware of it, even as the host of Starving for Darkness, you could actually see Bob Cajun's lights from the lake.
Oh, yeah.
You could
Yes.
see the glow above if you look to, so my father-in-law's cottage is on a provincial park. So if you look towards the provincial park, complete darkness. If you look
Hmm.
towards where Bob Cajun was, you could see all a sky glow. And I just felt very sad about that, especially since it's immortalized in a wonderful, extremely popular Canadian song. And so it's both. I was both excited that I could share the nature, silence, and the stars with the kids, but I was also sad that in the short period of time, this area of Canada has gone from being, maybe a 2 or even a 1 on the Bortle scale to now a
Yeah.
3, and then it's obviously going to keep going in that direction if we don't do something about it, Jane. So there's a long answer to your question. It goes both ways.
Well, I loved the answer, and actually, I may have a more hopeful reinterpretation of those lyrics, which is something along the lines of those stars appeared one at a time. And it made me think about how, you had turned out all the lights around you and had your daughter and friends sit outside, close their eyes, a la Frank Tarina. And hail to Frank Tarina. And close their eyes to actually fully adjust. And so the light pollution is not just coming from the outside sources, but it's also coming from the fact that we are never allowing the full adaptation to darkness to take place, which it takes about 60 minutes. So when I heard those lyrics, I wasn't really even thinking about external sources of light pollution. I was just thinking about that slow process of adaptation where the stars actually start to come out in front of you because you've allowed your eyes to adapt. So, a little more hopeful interpretation of those lyrics, perhaps. And it also just makes me think I'm just so happy that you got your daughter underneath the stars because they say 8 out of 10 school children do not experience night skies. And, what a loss that is for our thinking and our process of being human. So I think it's great that you brought that idea and introduced that to them and also allowed that adaptation to take place, which is really key. You can't go from like, I see these pictures online of people like shining a flashlight up to the stars. And I'm like, dude, that's actually hurting your ability to experience the stars. And it's making no difference on the sky itself. So I think there's a lot to learn about how we can actually more properly stargaze, and I think it was great what you did.
So I had about, I don't know, I'm going to try to count it off quickly here, but maybe, excuse me, maybe 16 to 20 non-family member children up at the cottage too. Over that
Mm-hmm.
period, I was driving. My neighbor's like, "Why you were driving back and forth all the time, and what was going on?" Because I have 4 children, they all have friends, and we all had to take them up to the cottage and get them out into nature. And it wasn't a vacation. I get a real kick out of it, so I love pulling them around on the boat and taking them into the park and jumping off cliffs and rock climbing and all the stuff we do there. But I'll tell you a little story about my niece, who came up with my brother and his family for a night as well. We have a sauna, okay? And I'll tell you this, I realized something about saunas that you know how I talk about the importance of fire, right? And I think that
Mm-hmm.
while it's understudied, there is some sort of very serious relationship between humans, firelight, the infrared waves of heat that hit you,
Yeah.
and intimacy and comfort and those positive, familial and deep love feeling emotions that we engage in as a species that bring us together. There's something with that infrared heat. So we were doing a sauna, and I told my niece, I said, I'm looking at the cirrus clouds here, sweetie, in the sky. I think it's going to be a starry night. I think it's going to be a starry night. She was all excited. And so anyway, we're doing the sauna. So you do the sauna at night. And I was in there and I'm looking at this sauna and I'm like, there's a reason why, a health reason why all these northern cultures, whether it's First Nations people in Canada, whether it's the Sami in northern Sweden, whether it's the First Nations people in Russia, the Germans, the Swedes, the Finns, all these people do this. They get these hot rocks and they go inside of a enclosed case and they sit in front of this very hot infrared heat. It does something to you. There's something about it's like a little sun in
Yes.
in a
Yeah.
box, right? And then you go jump in the cold water. And so she was doing this and doing this and doing this. And over the evening, the stars began to come out. And I found her just floating in the water on her back,
Oh.
staring up at the stars, because I had a bunch of kids there, and I'm like, where the heck is Mia? So I saw her. I said, hey, Mia, what are you doing out there? And she said, I'm just staring at the stars, Uncle. And she was just floating in the water for I don't know how many period of time just staring up at the sky. So I don't know if that's interesting to the lighthead listener, but it certainly is a very powerful experience, especially for children to connect themselves and ground themselves in the world. And these rituals of fire and saunas and gazing at the stars and sitting around fires and all this kind of stuff, this is our heritage. This is how we became the species that we are. And I think the loss of that is profound. It impacts us in some way that I don't think I can describe. It's so profound and I think vast that I don't know what to tell you. I think that I think everybody needs that on a regular basis, and I wish they could have it.
Well, I think it's a credit to how easily Mia took to the stars and to the idea. Just a small introduction of a starry night, and she suddenly knew to behold the stars. So I think that just shows how meaningful they really are to humans across the board.
And there was something to do with because we had a beach fire, we had a sauna, and people were rotating between those three things, congregating, talking. No cell phones, no TVs, no music even. We weren't even playing any music because in those situations, if you play even low levels of music, it will go right across the lake and everyone can hear it. There's
Yeah,
nothing worse than somebody on the lake playing loud music because you can hear it. It just travels right across.
right.
And so we were just chatting and all that sort of stuff. And then eventually, she's lying in the lake just on her back, staring up at the stars for half an hour. Very powerful experience for me to observe as well as an adult and someone that loves her and knowing that, that will be a memorable experience for her life. But I think a lot of people need to realize that when we're talking about dark skies, the stars are actually very bright. If you go into a like a provincial park in Ontario and go deep into the park, so maybe like 10 miles into the park, and you get into a secluded place and you have a very starry night and you get up in the middle of the night and you go walk out there, it is extraordinarily bright, even without the moon. It is
Yeah,
extremely bright outside. If you allow like you said, your eyes to adjust and all this,
right.
it's not dark. It's actually quite bright, and it would be a lot darker if it was cloudy. So
Right. Yep.
stars produce a lot of light. They send a lot of light down to Earth. So yeah, I'm glad I got to share that. And of course, because of our work, I was very interested in making that happen. So thank you for answering that question. I know it took a long time to talk about it, but
Yeah. I'm glad to hear it.
folks, if you made it to the end, this is brought to you by Keystone Technologies. That's right. There's some stars over at Keystone. Josh Brown, Evan Smith, you guys are stars, but we're talking about the real kind. But if you're interested in the easy folks, light made easy, go to KEYSTONETECH.com. That's KeystoneTech.com.